This footage shows a terrifying accident from May of 1983. It's an Israeli F-15D flying above the Negev desert with only one wing. The aircraft's pilot, Ziv Nadivi, had just recovered the jet from a tight spiral after colliding with an A-4 Skyhawk and was being ordered to eject. With a runway almost in sight only 10 miles away, however, Nadivi lit his afterburners and headed to attempt a most unconventional landing. The aircraft involved in the incident was a McDonnell Douglas F-15D Eagle and a Douglas A-4 Skyhawk, both owned by the Israeli Air Force. Ironically, the F-15 Eagle was created, designed, and assembled in the United States. A sophisticated jet, it's a twin-engine tactical fighter plane designed to fly in all weather conditions. In the late 60s, the U.S. Air Force reviewed several proposals for a fighter dedicated strictly to air superiority. Winning out, the F-15 wasn't initially conceived as an air superiority aircraft. In fact, the design included more, a secondary capability for ground attack. Nevertheless, most operators ignored secondary abilities. Its maiden flight commenced in July 1972, entering service fully in 1976. It's considered one of the most successful fighter planes of the modern era. Since its introduction, models have been exported to American allies Israel and Japan and sold to Saudi Arabia. To date, the F-15 has achieved more than 100 victories collectively and without a single loss of life. Most successes are credited to the Israeli Air Force, however. The Eagle was first imagined during the early days of the Vietnam War, when the U.S. Air Force and Navy competed to discover the next best tactical aircraft. The Air Force quickly adopted the F-15. Thanks to its weight-to-wing area ratio, the F-15 was highly maneuverable. Thanks to its high thrust-to-weight ratio, the Eagle could conduct tight turns without compromising airspeed. It climbed to 30,000 feet in just under 60 seconds. At some speeds, the aircraft could accelerate while traveling vertically. The dynamic thrust output of its engines was even higher than its combat weight and drag, which allowed the aircraft to accelerate without compromising speed. A key feature of the F-15 Eagle is a multi-mission avionics system with a heads-up display facilitating flight use. Other features include an internal guidance system, advanced flight instruments, radar, high-frequency communications, a tactical air navigation system, and several instrument landing system receivers. Amazingly, the plane also conducts electronic warfare to identify friends or foes and implement its own electronic countermeasures. In service, the F-15 totaled a record-breaking 104 kills with no losses as of February 2008. Over half of these were achieved by Israeli Air Force pilots. Furthermore, air superiority models A, B, C, and D have never fallen into enemy hands. Before the accident, the aircraft took down 4 enemy planes during the 1982 Lebanon War. On its second run, it took down a MiG-23 in Syria on November 19, 1985. The plane flown during the practice over the Negev was an F-15D, a 2-seat training version, of which 92 were built between 1979 and 1985. The other plane involved was a Douglas A-4 Skyhawk, a single-seater subsonic light attack plane. Its delta wing and use of one turbojet engine made it notably lightweight, with a maximum takeoff weight of 24,500 pounds. It can fly up to 670 miles per hour. The accident took place on May 1, 1983. The Israeli Air Force was carrying out a divergent air combat training session over the Negev region. An F-15D crashed into an A-4 Skyhawk after both planes approached each other too closely and their undersides collided. The Skyhawk plane caught on fire. The pilot immediately ejected. He was able to parachute to land safely. Ziv didn't even realize what had gone wrong at first. He simply felt a big push and saw the fireball caused by the exploding Skyhawk. He heard the radio communication informing the pilot had successfully ejected. The F-15 Eagle began rolling uncontrollably, its right wing dislocated about 2 feet from its root. Still, both crew members aboard the plane were oblivious. The leaking fuel streamed out of the wing, vaporizing at the wing attachment, which covered their view of the missing wing. Only after descending into a tight spiral did the pilots notice the missing key component. Ziv Nadivi gained control of the aircraft without realizing the full extent of the damage. He switched afterburners on, which at least halted the spin. The 2 crew members were ordered to eject, but opted instead to save the plane by landing it at the nearest airfield 10 miles away. Due to the lift from the fuselage, stabilators, and left wing, the jet remained stable. Nadivi diverted to Ramon Air Base. Suddenly, as he circled to land, the tailhook lowered and descended. The F-15 landed at 260 knots, twice the average speed to maintain lift during a standard landing. The tailhook was consequently destroyed. With high precision and a bit of luck, Nadivi was able to stop the plane only 20 feet from the airfield's barrier. About his decision to land, Nadivi later asserted that he, quote, probably would have ejected if I knew what had happened. In fact, the pilots only learned of their severed wing after inspecting the aircraft upon landing. The F-15 Eagle with the missing wing, labeled as the 106th Squadron's Marika Shakim, Hebrew for Sky Blazer, was sent to Tel Nof. At the Israeli Air Force Maintenance Unit, it underwent 2 months of repairs. Showing the F-15's extreme strength and reliability, the jet was soon restored entirely. It returned to normal service. In 1942, as the Japanese and the Americans returned from battle, a set of Japanese planes mistakenly tried to land on the USS Yorktown. A similar, yet friendlier accident would occur after the Korean War ceasefire, when one American pilot also mistakenly landed his Panther on the Yorktown. As per naval policy, if a pilot lands at the wrong aircraft carrier, their fellow crew members are supposed to treat the incoming pilot with respect and not purposefully embarrass him. Unofficial naval tradition, however, sometimes doesn't extend the same courtesy to the actual plane, and there exist many such examples of offending aircraft being covered with clever insults. A common one was to relabel Navy planes as property of the U.S. Air Force, implying that only an Air Force pilot could make such an embarrassing mistake. After the Battle of the Coral Sea, several Japanese pilots tried to mount an aircraft carrier that didn't even belong to their country. The Imperial Japanese Navy did not own the target vessel. In fact, it was registered to the enemy. The Battle of the Coral Sea was the first battle in naval history which featured aircraft carriers. While the massive ships didn't fire on their rival carriers, they employed their airplanes to attack and defend their position. As a result of the Coral Sea, the USS Lexington suffered such extensive damage the carrier was scuttled. Other American vessels also sustained severe damage, such as a destroyer, oiler, and the USS Yorktown. The Japanese suffered even greater losses, as one of their carriers sank to the bottom of the ocean, and an even larger carrier underwent extensive hull damage. Several small vessels were either sunk or bombed beyond repair. The Japanese Imperial Navy officers were not as prepared for the fight as their American rivals. Not only that, but their vessels did not account for the radar technology on board the USS Yorktown and USS Lexington. This was valuable technology. Admiral Takagi launched many bombers in response to an American cruiser, which had deployed Grumman F-4F Wildcats. The psychological impact on Japanese pilots can't be overstated. The move struck fear of a massive attack. Furthermore, it contributed to confusion among Japanese strike waves, causing them to break formation, abandon their goals, and often diverge. With no other option in sight, many opted to retreat. The Japanese were otherwise easy targets for Wildcat machine guns. As dusk settled over the Coral Sea, the situation became dire for the attacking Japanese pilots. Many Japanese pilots, disoriented by the Battle of the Coral Sea's unexpected American strength, turned around, headed for their carrier. The one they found, however, was not theirs. They flew into a landing pattern, signaling their intention to land. American officers on deck were predictably perplexed and fearful. After all, the incoming landings on the USS Yorktown may be a surprise attack. The situation was so confusing that VF-42 American pilot Lieutenant Junior Grade Elbert McCuskey reported, quote, "Everything was in a mess, with the Japanese planes and the American planes and the carriers all over the place. I couldn't find my carrier, so I landed on another. I saw 3 Japanese planes circling with us and thought they were part of a group from another carrier. I landed and was in the ready room when someone got wise that those 3 were Japanese." The first Japanese attempt was quickly corrected as the pilot idled his engine, drifting towards the carrier. Only at the last second did he realize what he was about to do. He rammed his throttle forward and navigated away. Even more disoriented, the next mistaken pilot was circling for a landing himself when they witnessed this evasion. Since the American aircraft was by then unarmed, having jettisoned their ordnance before landing, the response from those aboard the Yorktown was not as fast as they would have liked. The gunners aboard the carrier took their positions and began firing. In the fracas, they accidentally hit their own Wildcats. By the end of the night, of the Japanese aircraft that left their carriers, only 18 returned. Bill Sergey, one of the midshipmen on board the Yorktown, spoke at length about the incident, stating, quote, "Our skipper, Captain Buckmaster, passed the word, 'Stand by to repel boarders.' As the Japanese plane went by the port side and the meatball was seen, all guns took him on. It was like fireworks, with tracers going into any aircraft that went by. I guess they got the idea we were not theirs. It was unusual to say the least, and we were on edge. In the general confusion, some of the F-4Fs of our CAP flew through friendly fire. Ensign William W. Barnes landed with his oil coolers shot up. He was ready to fight the plane's handlers, wanting to know why we shot at him. Still, the incident was not the only time the USS Yorktown experienced a mistaken landing. A second event later yielded photos of a graffitied Panther, which were widely circulated. The embarrassing yet less dangerous incident took place following the Korean War ceasefire. It happened when a VF-111 Sundowner pilot was attempting to return to his aircraft carrier, the USS Lake Champlain. Instead, he mistakenly landed aboard the USS Yorktown. Consequently, the carrier crew graffitied his jet with quips such as "landed by the fighting lady," "dopey," and "barriers," a reference to when a carrier pilot overshoots their landing and has to be saved by a backup barricade to avoid crashing. This stunning photograph shows a pilot ejecting from a Vought F-8 Crusader, a single-engine carrier-based jet capable of supersonic speeds. During a crash landing, the pilot bravely manages to eject at the very last second using his Martin Baker Model F-5A ejection seat. He survived the mishap uninjured. For decades, the aircraft carrier has been a critical player in war. In the early 1960s, the vessel reached a new level of potency when the angled deck was introduced to accommodate new supersonic jets like the Vought F-8. This series of photos prove why the angled deck was so useful for new jet-powered technology. Without it, the results for this pilot would have been fatal. The aircraft carrier has been the most potent warship for generations. Since 1911, the deck plan for aircraft carriers had a single runway with the planes stored at one end. The first planes were catapulted into the air and away from the ship. Later, landing planes were stopped with arrestor wires and with the help of barricades. This meant accidents were prevalent, given that timing of the landing was crucial for a safe landing. When the jet-powered airplane came into the picture, it was a game-changer for carriers. These aircraft were much heavier than previous models and had a higher landing speed. To complete a safe landing, the jets needed as much deck available as possible. How could a carrier plane create more runway space for these new aircraft? In a vertical carrier deck, they could either launch or land the planes, but not at the same time. Although extending the carrier's size seems like the most obvious choice, this wouldn't work for several reasons. For starters, the issue remained of how to stop the jets if they missed the arrestor cables. Fewer aircraft could be parked in the carrier with the thick barriers put on the deck's front. In the winter of 1944, Captain Dennis Campbell from the British Royal Navy came up with the new idea of angling the landing deck. After hearing from a senior Royal Navy officer that jets were the future of naval aviation, Campbell knew their higher speeds would require modified carriers. This skewed deck invention would give the jets enough room for landing, and if they missed the wires, they could try again and again. The use of the barrier became an absolute last resort. The angled landing decks were an effective way of making arrested landings safer. It was the safest and less costly option. After the first trials were done, on simulated repainted ship decks, the first actual carriers with angled decks were the USS Antietam in 1953 and the HMS Centaur in 1954. Soon after the successful tests, every carrier commander wanted to have their own angled deck. Now that the angled deck allowed jets to land, it also made carriers deadlier and more effective. They could finally launch and land aircraft simultaneously. The area to starboard of the new runway gave a bigger parking space for other aircraft, their recoveries, parking, refueling, and rearming. Although this new deck concept seemed simple, the already existing carrier's conversion to have angled decks required several structural alterations. For example, loss of the armament compartments and the addition of new deck supports mounted on the port beam. On October 21, 1961, these photos capture the moment when a Vought F-8 Crusader from Fighter Squadron 11 attempted to land aboard the USS Franklin D. Roosevelt. During the landing, the main gear strut on the Vought F-8 snapped. The magnesium strut ignited, and the jet rolled off the end of the angled deck. Still, the pilot managed to bail out at the very last second, using his Martin Baker F-5A ejection seat. When the Martin Baker Company heard about these impressive photographs, they took advantage of the successful ejection. The company went on to use the photos in a successful ad campaign. The F-8 Crusader was a single-engine, supersonic, carrier-based jet aircraft built by Vought. It was used in the U.S. Navy, the Marine Corps, and was even used by the French Navy. Although this air superiority fighter performed exceptionally well, so much so that over 1,000 of them were produced in total. It had its fair share of accidents. F-8s were notoriously difficult to put down on carriers, as they were unstable at high sink rates. Carriers had to power full steam ahead in order to give pilots more margin for error to stick the plane on the flight deck. But even when down on the carriers, the F-8s would not be out of trouble. The nose gear design was problematic, and it was often difficult to keep the F-8s on a straight line. This photo shows a stolen Huey helicopter that landed directly in front of the White House in 1974. The aircraft was piloted by a disgruntled ex-soldier, 21-year-old Robert Kenneth. With only 157 hours of fixed-wing flight experience, Kenneth managed to evade police and Secret Service gunfire to land directly on the south lawn of the White House. Minutes after midnight, February 17th, Private First Class Robert Kenneth Preston stole an unarmed UH-1 Iroquois, also known as a Huey, from an airfield in Fort Meade, Maryland. Unqualified, according to his limited credentials and fixed-wing pilot's license, he nonetheless flew the helicopter directly to the heart of the nation's capital. Born in 1953, Robert Kenneth Preston grew up in Panama City, Florida. In 1972, he enlisted in the U.S. Army, intending to become a helicopter pilot. His dream was to evacuate wounded soldiers from battlefields. At Fort Walters in Texas, he started flying Hughes TH-55 Osages soon after. However, after failing the technical training requirements due to, quote, deficiency in the instrument phase, his chances of becoming a warrant officer pilot were immediately killed. Reportedly, the withdrawal of American troops from Vietnam and the resulting excess supply of helicopter pilots may have played some role in his rejection. Despite this, he was conscripted to serve in the Army for an additional 4 years. Therefore, by the start of 1974, he started work at Fort Meade as a helicopter mechanic. At the time of the incident, his commanding officer described him as being intelligent but unremarkable overall. On February 17, 1974, near the start of his second month serving at Fort Meade, Preston left an enlisted club just past midnight. Supposedly depressed due to the failure of his relationship and stagnation of his military career, Preston drove to his place of work, an Army airfield. Tipton Field was south of Fort Meade, housing 30 Bell UH-1 Iroquois helicopters, which were always fueled and prepped for takeoff. Here, Preston parked his car and climbed into a Huey with the designation 62-1920. The airfield sentry took note of his parked Chevy Nova only after the helicopter's rotor was already turning. According to Preston, quote, "I just walked out, prepared the aircraft for flight, started it, and took off. I was really surprised. I thought there would be somebody out there." Preston lifted off without radio call or anti-collision lights. Once the control tower noticed the unauthorized takeoff, they phoned the Maryland State Police. Preston would later state his intentions were to, quote, "get up and fly and get behind the controls. It would make me feel better because I love flying." The club, where he'd reportedly been drinking only soda earlier, phoned the police as well after the helicopter roared momentarily over the establishment, hovering. Residents of a trailer park nearby in Jessup reported that the plane touched down for a few seconds before taking off. Preston's cover was found later at that location. A mere 20 miles away, Preston reportedly concluded that he merely wanted to observe the nation's capital from above. After flying over the Baltimore-Washington Parkway, Preston reached the Capitol. The police of the District of Columbia were first alerted of Preston when they witnessed the helicopter flying between the Capitol building and the Lincoln Memorial. Operating an unauthorized aircraft near the area was strictly forbidden. However, flight boundaries were not enforced by surveillance besides radar. No one had previously dared to overfly the White House. Preston was attracted to the Washington Monument, lit up at night. According to him, he was, quote, "like a moth to the candlelight." With all of his external lights killed, Preston leveled off the helicopter a few feet above the monument's grounds. Secret Service agent Henry S. Kolbaski was on duty. He received the report about the stolen helicopter and flew directly towards the restricted area. Preston landed at the White House briefly, with no Secret Service agents firing at him. As 2 Maryland police helicopters approached, he took off again, commencing an aerial chase. According to one of the officers, Preston was, quote, "one hell of a pilot." He hovered over the Washington Monument, almost crashing into it as police fired. He turned to the Anacostia River, all the while circling the monument at low flight. Police on the scene described his evasion as using, quote, modern dogfight tactics. The private then flew back to the White House. After temporarily hovering at a height of 300 feet, he approached to land on the South Lawn again. He flew just high enough to avoid colliding with the picket fence, where he was greeted by a hail of shotgun and submachine gun fire. Kenneth was slightly wounded as he parked the Huey and ran outside. He was soon tackled on the South Lawn, running towards the White House. President Richard Nixon was not there at the time. Inevitably, Preston was court-martialed for stealing the chopper. Some remained impressed with his theatrical and reckless performance. Maryland Police Department Sergeant Thomas Linehan stated at the trial, quote, "They said he couldn't fly. Well, I'll tell you, he could fly if he had not harassed the citizens of the state of Maryland as he did, and had not made such a big show of it. The man could have flown directly into the White House at 160 knots, and there wouldn't have been anything anybody could do." Still, Preston got off light. He served only 6 months at a military stockade, then was discharged for unsuitability. Rumor has it, the incident influenced Samuel Bick's failed assassination attempt against Nixon only a week later when he tried to crash a commercial airliner into the White House. On June 11, 2016, during the Bundeswehr's open day at Hohn Air Base in Germany, a Transall C-160 cargo aircraft executed a maneuver that was risky enough under normal circumstances, let alone during wartime, and it was all caught on camera. The Sarajevo approach, otherwise known as combat landing, is a precise maneuver that requires a deep dive into the airstrip and then a bounce back at the last possible moment, all to avoid enemy fire. During the war in Bosnia, relief cargo aircraft from all over Europe were sent to Sarajevo in humanitarian missions, but on September 3, 1992, an Italian aircraft was down, despite its peaceful intentions. A German Transall C-160 was coming right behind, and the German crew now found themselves with a fully loaded aircraft and had to find a way to land safely. It was almost an impossible situation, forcing them to be more agile than all the warring parties surrounding the ravaged airport. In 1957, West German and French companies agreed to develop and produce a new aircraft together, and Transall was formed 2 years later. The Transporter Alliance Consortium was made up of Nordaviation, Weser Flugzeugbau, and Hamburger Flugzeugbau. The specifications called for a new tactical aircraft able to carry 16 tons of cargo over a range of 1,720 kilometers, or 8 tons over 4,540. Plus, the aircraft had to operate on semi-prepared airstrips. Though a 4-engine configuration was considered, it was passed over in favor of a cheaper twin-engine arrangement, which was lighter and used less fuel. The simplified layout provided a more reliable aircraft and featured 2 6,100 horsepower Rolls-Royce Tyne turboprops driving 4-bladed propellers. The transport was operated by a crew of 3, 2 pilots and a flight engineer. Furthermore, it had the capacity to carry 93 troops, up to 88 paratroops, or 62 stretchers. Typical loads ranged from wheeled or tracked vehicles, light or medium towed artillery pieces, and standard pallets. The C-160 could operate directly from frontline positions and had the significant advantage of being able to take off on airstrips as short as 700 meters or land with merely 400 meters available. As late as 2016, the Transall was still in use with the German military, and during the open day at Hohn Air Base on June 11th, it executed one of its iconic maneuvers. Footage taken at the event shows the post-war aircraft diving deep into the ground and pitching up just mere inches before touching it. It was a maneuver the C-160 had already performed over 2 decades before, in the midst of one of the most gruesome recent wars. 8 minutes before landing, the air traffic controllers at Sarajevo suddenly lost radio contact with an incoming Italian transport aircraft. The voices in the headphones fell silent exactly at 1 p.m. on September 3, 1992. Yugoslavia had recently broken apart, and the emerging Bosnia and Herzegovina strive for independence from the rest of the former republics. Still, several ethnically rooted archaic disputes arose among the multi-ethnic populations of Bosniaks, or Bosnian Muslims, Serbs, and Croats. After the new nation's Declaration of Independence was recognized in the spring of 1992, hell broke loose in the capital. Bosnian Serb paramilitary troops opened fire on Sarajevo and then engaged in heavy artillery bombardment. Entire populations were displaced or even ethnically cleansed, resulting in a grim humanitarian crisis that soon drew international attention. By September, military crews from 19 nations had delivered 12,000 tons of supplies to the ravaged capital in no less than 1,000 missions on behalf of the United Nations. But that day, the relief efforts would take an unexpected turn. The Italians had been attacked and hit by a missile, putting into question the operational conditions in Bosnia. A second aid aircraft was crossing over to the war zone right after the Italians. It was a Transall cargo transporter from the Bundeswehr, crewed by 5 men and loaded with 15 tons of supplies. Transall routinely flew 2 missions a day every 4 days from Zagreb in Croatia. The crew had been assured that none of the warring parties had surface-to-air missiles. Thus, the C-160 flew without passive protection, unconcerned with the possibility of rockets. However, they soon realized what happened to the Italian transport aircraft and had to make a decision quickly. While most maneuvers didn't pose a significant risk for 4-engine cargo carriers, such as the American Hercules, with its higher top speed and longer range, the so-called combat approach could be fatal for the twin-engine Transall. If one engine failed on the approach to Sarajevo, the other one would not be enough to lift the loaded transport to safe heights. There was no choice. The crew had to land in the war-stricken area. 1.5 hours into the flight, and while at 2,500 meters, the pilots idled the engines and extended the flaps and air brakes. They then began a steep descent onto the runway while taking sharp turns to avoid being hit by the ground forces. To make matters worse, the airport landing aids were destroyed, and every approach had to be controlled visually. Sarajevo did not have a ground-controlled approach or GCA radar to guide the crew. Simple cloud formations then became a significant threat to the crew's safety, forcing the pilots to avoid those between their aircraft and the line of sight to the runway. Only then could the aircraft curve out of the narrow corridor designated as an approach lane. What happened next would come to be known as the Sarajevo approach. The Sarajevo approach is usually required when there's an enemy presence in a landing zone. Journalist Eric Milzarski wrote, quote, "You can prepare grunts for the rigors of combat, yes, but you can't prepare them to be sloshed around in an aircraft that's packed like a can of sardines as it descends downward in a near-vertical corkscrew that stops on a dime." The pilots first have to perform a corkscrew cruise to lower altitude. Before coming to an airfield, cargo aircraft have an average altitude of 18,000 feet, and thus, the transport has to arrive 7 to 10 minutes before the scheduled landing. When the aircraft is in line with the landing strip, the aircraft drops sharply at about 60 degrees. As seen in the 1992 footage, the pilots then dive towards the ground, and at the last possible moment, they pull up, just in time to hit the runway. The moment the wheels touch, the pilots open the slats or spoilers and put the gear into full reverse to come to a complete stop, having used as little runway as possible. In 1992, the Bundeswehr transporter managed to perform the strenuous maneuver under critical circumstances, 50 minutes later than planned. However, it came out unscathed. The following week, 14 attacks were reported on 8 aircraft. To minimize risks and continue relief operations in the war-torn city, the Transall was equipped with radar warning devices and missile safeguards. In addition, the model was provided with more advanced navigation and flight instruments, autopilot, Kevlar armor, chaff dispensers, and electronic warfare self-protection systems. All Luftwaffe transporters would receive such upgrades eventually. Furthermore, crews would receive thorough training to learn how to shoot flares to deflect heat-seeking missiles away from the hot engines just at the right moment. Other evasive maneuvers would also be taught, like the so-called yo-yo flight, dropping down and quickly lifting up repeatedly to evade missiles. The C-160 proved to be a versatile aircraft, serving in specialist roles, from electronic intelligence and communications platforms to aerial refueling. Decades later, the aircraft kept serving with generations of pilots who continued practicing a dangerous maneuver that could save their lives one day. On April 26, 2022, a Twitter user uploaded an impressive photograph that quickly went viral. As journalist Tyler Rogaway remarked, quote, "Submarine shots rarely get cooler than this." The breathtaking image showed a V-22 Osprey stirring the sea's surface with its powerful rotors as it hovered over a mysterious submarine. And it is believed that the aircraft was carrying out submarine operations with special commandos when the picture was taken. The aircraft has served in the U.S. military for several decades and is especially useful for operations with the SSGN family of guided missile submarines, the Ohio class. Few details have been revealed about the unidentified vessel, but that hasn't stopped experts and enthusiasts from trying to get to the bottom of the mystery. A picture showing a Bell-Boeing CV-22 Osprey conducting submarine logistics operations was posted on Twitter in April of 2022 by a user with the handle @TheNewArea51. The tweet accompanying the compelling photograph read, quote, "A V-22 Osprey conducting submarine ops. This is how Jack Ryan would get aboard the USS Dallas if the hunt for Red October was remade today." Indeed, the Bell-Boeing joint project offers capabilities that were only a dream back in the 1980s and 90s. The story of the multi-mission tilt-rotor VTOL and STOL hybrid aircraft began in 1980 during the Iran hostage crisis, which saw the failure of Operation Eagle Claw. It soon became evident that there were critical military roles that neither conventional helicopters nor fixed-wing crafts could perform in their limited functions. Thus, the United States Department of Defense initiated a program that would see through the development of an innovative piece of aeronautical engineering, and that could merge the advantages of the tilt-rotor aircraft's maneuverability with the long-range, high-speed cruise performance of turboprops. The Joint Service, Marine Corps, and Air Force Vertical Takeoff and Landing Experimental JVX program officially commenced in 1981. Within 2 years, the clear winner of the development contract emerged. It was the V-22 model, designed through the Bell Helicopter and Boeing Helicopters partnership. Even though it showed a lot of promise, the complex project faced several difficulties during its development years, primarily by being the first of its kind to be used for military service. Still, the V-22 flew for the first time in 1989 and began flight testing and pertinent design alterations shortly after. The program then dragged on for several years. Although the Marine Corps began training their crews on the MV-22B Osprey as early as 2000, it would still take several years to put it into service. It wasn't until September of 2005 that the Pentagon approved full-rate production, and the joint Bell-Boeing team accelerated the manufacture up to 48 examples per year. The Marine Corps finally fielded the hybrid in 2007, which initially supplemented the older Boeing Vertol CH-46 Sea Knights, but eventually replaced the model altogether. Meanwhile, the Air Force fielded the CV-22B in 2009, their custom version of the tilt-rotor. From the moment it entered service with both branches, the Osprey was deployed in transportation and medical evacuation operations over the Middle East, namely in Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, and Kuwait. Moreover, the aircraft was purchased by the Japanese Armed Forces and is currently in service in the Far East, and it is likely that other international prospects will acquire the machine, including India and Indonesia. In addition, the Navy planned to use a specialized version of the Osprey, the CMV-22B, for carrier onboard delivery duties starting in 2021, and the aircraft's mixed capabilities can also be used for submarine operations. Beyond medical evacuations, V-22 can deliver small cargoes or move special operations personnel on and off submarines, and thus the model is especially relevant for the Navy's 4 guided cruise missile submarines, or SSGNs. The Osprey's range and speed enable it to achieve feats helicopters cannot usually do, as well as reach places that are generally inaccessible to tilt-rotor aircraft. Not to mention, it can also do it faster. Prior to the publication of the viral photograph, the U.S. Special Operations Command shared images that provided more context and added hints as to the submarine's identity. Moreover, the post also presented clues regarding the location of the operations. The April 22nd pictures documented the 352nd Special Operations Wing exercises conducted in late 2021 to the east of the Mediterranean Sea. Reportedly, the drills tested the V-22's ability to execute infiltration and exfiltration maneuvers in support of various missions. The caption accompanying the additional images stated, quote, 352nd SOW Air Commandos integrated with Naval Special Warfare Task Unit Europe and U.S. Naval Forces Europe-Africa for a first-time endeavor in the Mediterranean that enhanced the ability to use SOF aircraft to provide rapid infill and exfil for a spectrum of SOF missions. By the spring of 2022, the V-22 was already consolidated within the U.S. military and in full service more than 3 decades after its conception. Thus, it was not surprising to see the unique airframe in action. Still, the submarine in the picture has remained a mystery. Several experts assure that it is an Ohio-class nuclear-powered SSGN, while Roggeway claims that it's, quote, identical in appearance to USS Georgia. However, there has been no confirmation. The photo was arguably taken instance before or after the special operators winched onto or off the vessel. As the military website explained, SSGNs, or Ohio-class guided missile submarines, quote, provide the Navy with unprecedented strike and special operation mission capabilities from a stealthy, clandestine platform. Such submarines are armed with tactical missiles equipped with superior communications capabilities. Therefore, the specialized ships can directly support combatant commanders' strike and special operation forces requirements. The class resulted from the SSGN program, which refueled and converted 4 SSBN ballistic missile submarines into the new type of SSGNs. The enterprise, carried out in the early 2000s, took a little more than 5 years and was significantly cheaper than building a new platform from scratch. 2 decades later, the class became a vital element of the Navy's future fighting force. As the portal claims, quote, with its tremendous payload capacity, dual crew deployment concept, and inherent stealth, each SSGN brings mission flexibility and enhanced capabilities to the warfighter. The 4 sisters are USS Ohio, USS Michigan, USS Florida, and of course, USS Georgia. In the early months of 2022, USS Georgia was spotted several times in various locations within European waters. Several released pictures show that the ship was with the U.S. Navy's 6th Fleet in January in the surroundings of the Mediterranean island of Cyprus. According to journalist Tyler Roggeway from The Drive, the attempt was undoubtedly deliberate, quote, to bolster NATO's visible presence in the region in the wake of Russian threats against Ukraine. 2 months later, Georgia was also shown in training exercises for special operations with the Marines from Task Force 61-2. As the pictures show, they were conducting launch and recovery training with combat rubber raiding craft out of Suda Bay in Greece. Roggeway explained that a stint off the coast of Gibraltar ended precisely on April 22nd, after which it is speculated that the submarine might have returned to the eastern Mediterranean to continue her patrols. While the identity of the submarine may never be confirmed, the photograph will indeed remain in the collective imagination of military enthusiasts for years to come, because, as Roggeway put it, quote, with the sea swirl kicking up under the CV-22's prop rotors, the image shows how exhilarating the operation must have been for the commandos involved. Right at the dawn of the Iraq War, an A-300 cargo plane working as a DHL delivery aircraft was struck by a surface-to-air missile just after takeoff. With a damaged left wing, an engine spilling fuel, and no hydraulic flight control, the brave men in the 3-person crew made an emergency landing using only the plane's engines and throttle control. That same day, the German courier service suspended its operations in the Middle Eastern country and began a thorough investigation. This included analyzing bone-chilling video footage of the attack. Over a decade and a half since the attack, the crew continues to astonish with their bravery, wit, and quick thinking. At 6:30 a.m. on November 22, 2003, an A-300 Airbus cargo plane, owned by European Air Transport, took off from Baghdad International Airport to do business as a DHL express vehicle. The cargo plane's crew consisted of an experienced group of 3 men, with a combined 17,000 hours of flight experience. The crewmen were Captain Eric Janot and First Officer Steve Michelson, both from Belgium, and Scottish flight engineer Mario Rafael. Because they were flying above Iraq, the crew performed a rapid climb to reduce exposure to ground attack. But their attempt was futile. Not long after takeoff, the plane was struck on its left wing by a surface-to-air missile. The severe blow to the wing resulted in a fire and complete loss of the hydraulic flight control systems. Liquid jet fuel trickled from the aircraft as its fuel tank disintegrated. With the flight controls disabled, the aircraft began to pitch up and down in a roller coaster-like oscillation. Captain Janot attempted to use thrust to modify the aircraft's speed and altitude, trying to control the plane's yawing. Meanwhile, engineer Rafael successfully executed a gravity drop maneuver to extend the landing gear. He achieved this by deploying the aircraft's landing gear with gravity, a procedure that he amazingly performed without the hydraulic power. Thanks to the men's quick reaction to the potentially fatal accident, their moves helped reduce the plane's speed. After 10 minutes of experimentation, the crew managed to stabilize the aircraft. When the plane became stable, the men executed a right turn and began to descend, achieving an injury-free landing onto the unprepared ground. All 3 men were uninjured. Later that day, DHL's official spokeswoman, Patricia Thompson, told the AFP news agency that they would suspend all flights to Baghdad for at least 48 hours. Authorities said that they would launch an official investigation into the attack, which marked the first time a civilian plane was forced to make an emergency landing due to a surface-to-air missile in war-era Iraq. Before the attack on the DHL cargo plane happened, authorities had documented 8 previous instances of missiles being fired at civilian aircraft. Likewise, weeks before the missile struck the DHL plane, several military helicopters had been shot down with similar weapons, a propaganda coup for Iraqi groups resisting the country's US-led occupiers. Not long after the DHL announced the beginning of their investigation, Sarah Daniel, a French journalist covering the Iraq War, claimed to own a video from an unknown source that showed the attack. In the footage, which was later delivered to the AFP press agency, a group of about 10 men with their faces concealed can be seen firing a missile at the DHL aircraft. The tape shows the launch, the missile impact, and the DHL crew's maneuvers to return to the airport while the left wing was on fire. However, Daniel denied any specific knowledge of the people who carried out the attack, and the tape's authenticity could not be determined. According to CNN terrorism analyst Peter Bergen, the tape appeared to be unclear and blurry. But if authentic, footage like this demonstrates how the Iraqi guerrillas document their actions. As Bergen said, quote, "I guess the point here is obviously getting these tapes out has a very, very good propaganda value." The official investigation never delivered any concrete results. When the men returned to Europe after their incident, the crew members were welcomed and celebrated all over the continent. The British Honourable Company of Air Pilots honoured them with the prestigious Hugh Gordon Burge Memorial Award. This honour is given once a year to a flight crew whose action and quick thinking contributed to saving their aircraft or their passengers. The men were also awarded the Flight Safety Foundation's Professionalism Award. The Foundation's official statement declared that the prize was presented to the crew due to their, quote, "extraordinary piloting skills in flying their aircraft to a safe landing after a missile strike following takeoff from Baghdad, Iraq." 3 years later, Captain Janot toured France with a special presentation depicting his incident titled "Landing an A300 Successfully Without Flight Controls." However, the plane did not fare as well as its crew. In addition to severe wing and undercarriage damage, the engines were ruined for ingesting too much debris. The A300 plane never flew again. In 2004, it was repaired and put up for sale, but never acquired. The aircraft has since been scrapped. British Sea Harriers are formidable jet fighters, known for their vertical takeoff and landing capabilities. In 1983, these aptitudes would make international news during one of the most spectacular emergency landings in recent history. During a routine training exercise, Sub-Lieutenant Ian Wilson, a young 25-year-old pilot flying the $7 million aircraft, became lost in the middle of the sea. His navigation systems malfunctioned, and his radio wasn't able to reach base. Desperate, the pilot began an ardent physical search for the carrier. After traveling tens of miles with no results, Watson realized he was running out of time, as his fuel tanks were almost empty. Knowing he had few options left, the pilot made peace with the possibility of ejecting from the plane and letting the precious jet sink to the bottom of the sea. But just as his meter marked that he had fuel for less than a minute of flying time, Watson spotted a small Spanish cargo ship. This would be the only chance he would have to save the Sea Harrier and himself from a guaranteed demise. The space on the ship's deck was reduced, by the various containers it carried, and Watson would have to land on top of them. The maneuver was perilous, the results were caught on camera, and the incident caused an international scandal. In contrast to most jet fighters of their kind, the British Sea Harriers are not equipped with supersonic-capable engines. They're subsonic medium-range fighters designed to conduct defensive operations for Royal Navy task groups. In other words, they protect Britain's carriers. The design of these fighters stemmed from the aftermath of World War II. After the war, political pressure in the UK to grow a healthy peacetime economy and decrease the size of the military caused a drastic contraction of the Royal Navy. England's government wasn't willing to fund and maintain the colossal capital ships and navy carriers that had been regularly developed during the previous decades. In response to this obstacle, the Royal Navy stopped requesting vast navy carriers and concentrated on developing light aircraft carriers instead. The switch to light aircraft carriers implied a general change in warfare tactics. In contrast to the slow and colossal navy carriers, these ones were fast and small and could carry only a minimal quantity of aircraft. The small and agile light carriers served a support role. They would cover amphibious operations and defend fleets from enemy attacks. Hence the need for a versatile and powerful fighter that didn't require vast space to land or take off. Thanks to its single Rolls-Royce Pegasus turbofan engine, the fighter jet had enough power to perform effectively while keeping a light enough structure that allowed increased agility and the versatility to carry additional weapons and external fuel tanks mounted under its wings. In addition, it has 2 landing gear systems on the fuselage and 2 outrigger ones on the wings designed to perform both conventional and vertical landings. The addition of ski jump equipment allowed the aircraft to take off from a short flight deck with a heftier payload than would otherwise be possible. The maximum range of the Harrier was only 460 miles, which meant the fighter had to stay relatively close to its carrier base to successfully resupply fuel. After an extended development and testing program, the Sea Harrier was deployed in 1981, debuting more than 300 units. As the years passed, the aircraft became more and more specialized in support and defensive maneuvers as a substitute for strike operations. Despite its firepower and versatility, the Sea Harrier was criticized for its obsolete radar and navigation systems. The Blue Fox radar system, which the first iteration of the fighter used, was prone to failure and showcased a peculiarly low performance compared to what was available at the time. Lieutenant Ian Watson took off from HMS Illustrious on June 7, 1983, with a first-generation fighter, specifically the Royal Navy Sea Harrier ZA-176. Watson had limited flight experience, especially flying by himself, and had only piloted the Harrier 13 times before that day. With 75 hours of flight time, he wasn't officially fit to conduct NATO operations. However, he was a determined and resourceful young pilot, and his commanding officer sent him along with an experienced senior pilot. The mission revolved around a particular scenario. The 2 aircraft had to locate a lost French carrier while simulating combat conditions. The explicit setting demanded that both pilots turn off their radars, radio, and navigational systems, and the challenge was to find the carrier without such location advantages. As both Harriers took off and dispersed, the pilots complied with the mission requirement and turned off their navigational gear. After successfully completing the mission scenario, Watson prepared to safely return to the carrier. The young pilot booted up his navigation systems just to realize something was wrong. The first thing Watson attempted to do was contact his mission partner through the radio, but he received only silence. The radio system on that specific Sea Harrier was known to be malfunctioning, and now it was completely dead. Watson later commented on the actions that followed, quote, "I went through everything I had in the airplane to help me. I tried the radio. I had the radar on. I squawked emergency. Absolutely nothing. There were no returns on the radar." The pilot then tried to locate his base ship by his own navigational instincts, but he flew utterly blind for a long time and could not find the carrier or his flight companion. Bad turned to worse as Watson realized he had less than 12 minutes of flight time before his Harrier would run out of fuel. He was in the middle of the ocean, and even if he ejected the plane before a water crash, he would surely drown as there was no way to call for help. Watson suddenly turned east as he remembered that there were shipping lanes off the coast of Portugal. And just as his fuel reserves were about to drain, he spotted a small cargo ship, the Alrego. It was his last hope. With only a few minutes of flight time left, Watson's mission was clear. He had to make sure the ship saw him before ejecting and hoping the ship's crew would rescue him. He then dived for a flyby to try to get the attention of the sailors, and when Watson flew over the ship, he could see that the containers it carried were piled up high, forming a small platform with a size very similar to the landing pads where he had been training to land. He would later say about this realization, quote, "Well, I thought in for a penny, in for a pound, and I landed the airplane on the containers." In his mind, landing on the ship would be a better option to eject. He would avoid not being spotted and rescued by the crew, and also save the $7 million fighter. As he performed his vertical landing on top of the containers, he deployed the landing gears too late. The fighter then slid backward, falling down from the containers and leaning against a white van transported by the ship. Luckily, he, the plane, and the ship's crew were safe. Watson was not welcomed aboard the Spanish ship with open arms. The ship's captain was furious and refused to change his schedule due to the misadventures of a rookie British pilot. He then radioed the British carrier and told them that if they wanted their Harrier back, they would have to wait 4 days until he landed in Tenerife. When the cargo ship finally arrived at the port, a massive crowd of reporters was waiting to interview the pilot and capture the peculiar scenario. The Royal Navy was humiliated by the incident and was forced to pay a fee of $1.14 million to the ship's owners as a salvage fee for returning the lost Harrier. As for Watson, he was recalled to HMS Illustrious, and although he wasn't officially reprimanded, he was still assigned to a desk job. As a convoy of trucks was driving in the middle of a blizzard during the harsh Kazakhstan winter of 2017, an apparition from a bygone era caught them completely off guard. Amidst the whiteness of the horizon, a Soviet Mi-8 helicopter, with its massive rotor blades still stirring, was parked in the middle of the highway, obscuring their path. The confused drivers hesitated to go anywhere near the running helicopter, but suddenly a dark silhouette got out of the gunship and approached the convoy, while the otherworldly encounter was documented for the world to see. The Mil Mi-8 is a Soviet-era helicopter developed after the proven effectiveness of the Mi-4 and Mi-6. Initially, the military dismissed Mikhail Mil's proposal for a new helicopter because they were more than content with the existing rotary aircraft. In response, Mil proposed an upgrade to new turbine engines rather than an entirely different helicopter. The Council of Ministers agreed, and production soon started. The clever Mil argued that the engine's position required a significant redesign of its front half, and the new airframe was then developed around a single AI-24 Soloviev turboshaft engine. Interestingly, it was the chairman of the Council of Ministers, Nikita Khrushchev, who paved the way for the eventual two-engine version. During an official visit to the United States in 1959, Khrushchev took a flight in the presidential S-58 helicopter and was highly impressed. Upon his return to the Soviet Union, he ordered a similar helicopter that had to be ready by the time the American president visited them. A luxury version of the Mi-4 was thus developed, but its creator knew better. During Khrushchev's inspection flight, Mil proposed that the new helicopter he was developing would be more suitable, adding that it would only require a second engine for reliability. Empowered by Khrushchev's support, Mil was finally able to build his original two-engined helicopter. And for the first time in Soviet history, purpose-built turbine engines were devised for the prototype, rather than adapting models from fixed-wing aircraft, with an entirely new main rotor gearbox designed in-house. In 1960, Mil was asked to create the twin-engine helicopter, while Sergei Isatov's design bureau would create the engines. The V-8 prototype's design had started back in 1958 and was based on the Mi-4, but with a larger cabin. It first flew in mid-1961, and shortly after, it participated in the Soviet Aviation Day Parade. But it wasn't until the third twin-engine prototype took its first flight in 1962 that a new era in Soviet air design began, with its purpose-built turbines. The aircraft completed its factory-based testing with two final prototypes in early 1953. These were a VIP transport and a mass production vehicle for the passenger market. Then, the following year, all joint testing was completed, and the helicopter entered mass production, with its first production example delivered in late 1965. Despite its proven performance, the Soviet military didn't show much interest in the model until the American Bell UH-1 was widely publicized during the Vietnam War. Only then did the Soviets rush a troop-carrying variant that joined the Soviet Air Force in 1967. From then on, many variants branched from the original, including the Mi-17 export version that is operated by dozens of countries, including Kazakhstan. Deep into the February-winter of 2017, a snowstorm covered the steppes of northern Kazakhstan when an uncanny object suddenly blocked the Aktobe-Shymkent highway. A Mi-8 helicopter had landed in the middle of the road near the village of Karabutak, cutting off both lanes. The imposing machine halted a convoy of cargo trucks while parked there, with its rotors still twirling slowly and stirring snow all around. One of the drivers caught the incident on camera, and the footage eventually went viral. In the video, the black profile of the helicopter can be seen against the white background, as a voice is heard complaining, quote, "What the fuck is he doing? He's just sitting there in the middle of the road." Moments of silence follow as the truck drivers hesitate to come closer to the 21-meter blades. Before long, a campy figure disembarks from the gunship, dressed in black from head to toe. The man then jogs gracelessly towards the trucks and shakes hands with the first driver. He then engages in an unheard conversation while gesticulating frantically and pointing in several directions. The driver then points in the helicopter's direction, and the pilot then makes his way back. Still, while walking towards the Mi-8, he turns around to give the driver a thumbs up, and then he can be seen holding down his fur hat amidst the strong winds. As the pilot reaches the helicopter, a voice from the convoy radio can be heard laughing and saying, quote, "They were lost. He came to ask which way to Aktobe." Next, the Mi-8 revs its engines and starts its way up, whipping up stacks of snow as it resumes its mission as if nothing had happened. The video of the surreal encounter quickly spread online, to the point that the Kazakhstan Ministry of Defense was flooded with questions. The authorities then released a statement saying that the helicopter was loaded with 4 rocket pods and was carrying out a, quote, "planned visual orienteering exercise." The statement also affirmed that the helicopter returned to the airfield where it was based without further drawbacks. Reportedly, the exercise was a success. During drills, trainee pilots are told to figure out their location on their own by using the resources at hand, just as they would in case their equipment fails. However, they are allowed to get help, quote, "by means of human survey." In late 2019, JSC Russian Helicopters signed a supplementary agreement with Kazakhstan Engineering and Aircraft Repair Plant No. 405 for $460 million. The deal called for an initial batch of 17 semi-knockdown kits supplied by the Russian Ulan-Ude aviation plant to assemble Mi-8 AMT Mi-171E helicopters in the country. The first 8 examples were delivered throughout 2020, and the last should take no longer than 2026. In fact, an outline foresees the delivery of no less than 45 kit versions to Kazakhstan by 2025, which will be assembled locally. On their part, Russian helicopters will certify the assembly line and provide through-life support for assembled platforms and general assistance. Plus, the company offered to deliver training for Kazakh personnel. Notably, Minister of Defense and Aerospace Industry Babut Atamkulov had reported in 2018 that Aircraft Repair Plant No. 405 already had significant experience with the Russian aircraft, with up to 10 frontline helicopters and 4 military transport aircraft that needed to be repaired at the facility. Despite the plant's considerable expertise in regards to maintenance and overhaul of MiL helicopters, the new agreement will benefit the national industry greatly. Chairman of the board of Kazakhstan Engineering, Kornish Bashimov, explained, quote, "The technology for assembling heavy helicopters has been introduced to Kazakhstan for the first time, and this is a significant step in the development of Kazakhstan's helicopter industry." Similarly, Andrei Baginsky, chief executive of Russian Helicopters, commented, quote, "Our cooperation will assist in the modernization of Kazakhstan's rotary wing fleet and in the enhancement of the scientific and technical potential of local Kazakh enterprises." The Su-25 Frogfoot is Russia's most effective close air support aircraft to date. It has seen intense combat as far back as the 1980s, and the current Russian special military operation in Eastern Europe has been no exception. The Frogfoot has faced tenacious resistance from the Ukrainian defenses, which has led to multiple shootdowns by anti-aircraft fire and jet fighters. And in an impressive moment captured on camera in December of 2022, an Su-25 aircraft with a seemingly malfunctioning landing gear can be seen carefully approaching a landing strip in an attempt to land belly first. The brave pilot was now faced with the daunting task of using every ounce of his skill to make it out alive. The Frogfoot, or Sukhoi Su-25 Grach, is one of Russia's most effective CAS, or close air support aircraft, developed to date. Its origins can be traced back to the height of the Cold War, following the aftermath of the Vietnam War, when the Soviet Union and the United States began developing powerful, dedicated ground attack aircraft that could be used for any conflict. In 1977, the U.S. Air Force introduced the Fairchild Republic A-10 Thunderbolt II, or Warthog, and a year later, the USSR did the same with Grach, or Rook, designated Frogfoot by NATO. Like the Warthog, the Frogfoot was a dedicated CAS aircraft, and the testing ground of the first two prototypes were the early days of the Soviet-Afghan War, where over 50 models flew more than 60,000 sorties and employed an arsenal that devastated the combat zones of Afghanistan. The Rook was armed with a Gryazev-Shipunov GSH-32 30mm autocannon with a devastating fire rate of 2,500 to 3,000 rounds a minute. The aircraft also has a nose-mounted laser rangefinder that makes the cannon extremely accurate. And it could be fitted with wing-mounted 23mm cannon pods and carry Fab 500 1,100-pound bombs. Modern equipment includes Vimpel R-73 highly agile air-to-air missiles and S-13T 130mm rockets. To match its CA support, the Rook was designed with a welded titanium armored compartment up to 25mm thick. The aircraft has been so successful that more than 1,000 have been built since its introduction in 1978. Moreover, numerous variants have ensured the Su-25 stays up to date with modern conflicts. Since its introduction, the Su-25 has been deployed in over a dozen global conflicts, from Georgia and Chechnya in Europe to Syria and Afghanistan in the Middle East. The Frogfoot has truly seen it all, leading analysts worldwide to inevitably compare it with its American counterpart, the A-10 Warthog. One key advantage of the Su-25 over the A-10 is its 34% higher cruise speed, allowing it to deliver close air support quickly and effectively to friendly forces under fire. Additionally, the Su-25's ability to take off from any surface, including dirt roads or uneven terrain, bolsters its CAS role, enabling it to be located closer to the front line and provide support in even shorter amounts of time. On the other hand, the Warthog has impressive long-range capabilities, with a longer flight time than the Su-25, thanks to its fuel tanks and its capacity to be refueled in flight. When it comes to armament, the Warthog was built around the powerful GAU-8 Avenger cannon. Although highly effective for its role, it is heavy and expensive, compared to the Russian GSH-32 gun, which is almost 3 times lighter, cheaper, and easier to maintain. Even so, the A-10 can carry twice the payload of the lighter Su-25, which takes the upper hand in speed and under armor. Despite their differences, both aircraft were designed with different military doctrines in mind and have excelled at their respective CAS roles. The Su-25 airframe was specifically designed to withstand and absorb damage from enemy fire, given its close air support role that involves performing low-altitude flights to accurately attack the enemy. And despite its robust design, the Su-25 has had to perform emergency landings in combat scenarios due to failures, combat damage, and weather contingencies. However, it has managed to survive such landings thanks to its well-designed airframe and its pilots' exceptional skill. Many of them have been belly landings, when the aircraft lands without landing gear and uses its underside to hit the ground. These landings are generally related to mechanical malfunctions. During these landings, the aircraft suffers extensive damage, often resulting in fatal crashes. They can flip over, catch fire, explode, or disintegrate depending on the speed and the terrain. Moreover, to increase their chances of survivability, the pilots must ensure their aircraft land as straight as possible while maintaining perfect control. And during the ongoing war in Eastern Europe, a lone Su-25 was caught on camera performing a perfectly executed belly landing. On December 10, 2022, a video shot on a cell phone camera at a military airbase near the Ukrainian border and initially shared on open-source intelligence group Ukraine Weapons Tracker went viral. The shocking footage captures a Russian jet approaching a landing strip while unable to deploy its landing gear successfully. The pilot aboard the Frogfoot had no choice but to attempt a belly landing, flying lower and lower without reducing speed. As the aircraft scraped along the gray runway, an incredible amount of sparks flew, causing concern for the safety of the crew and aircraft. As the aircraft dragged along the runway, 2 stop parachutes deployed from the back, slowing it down dramatically and reducing the distance it needed to travel on the ground to come to a halt, reducing the danger to the crew. The Open Intelligence Group reported that the full extent of the damage inflicted upon the Su-25 is unclear, but it is unlikely to be flying again soon. And although the precise site of the military plane's landing is still unknown, the Z marking on its vertical stabilizer is painted on Russian military vehicles and aircraft taking part in the invasion of Ukraine, where the Frogfoot has been providing close air support for Russian troops. As an operational warplane, the Su-25 in the video may have suffered battle damage, like a hit from anti-aircraft artillery or shrapnel from a missile. Nonetheless, the video showcases the bravery and exceptional skills of the pilot who managed to safely land the aircraft and avert a potential disaster. While the video of the emergency landing showcases the abilities of the Russian pilot, there are several theories around the actual cause, one of which is a mechanical failure. The Su-25 fleet, a Cold War-era aircraft that has borne the brunt of Russia's fixed-wing losses since the conflict began, may be struggling to be properly maintained on the battlefield, as indicated by the video. According to a November 2022 report by Business Insider, Russian soldiers have quickly used up their arsenal of fresh ammunition and are now firing off decades-old ones, significantly raising the risk of further malfunctions that could put their soldiers in danger. In the initial 8 months since the conflict began, the troops have brought down more than 278 Russian aircraft, according to Valery Zaluzhny, the commander-in-chief of the Ukrainian armed forces. With the conflict now over a year old, both sides have been losing multi-million-dollar aircraft at unsustainable rates. The Ukrainian Air Force began the conflict with only 125 combat aircraft, but with additional NATO support, the Ukrainians have managed to fight to a standstill with Russia. As such, the invaders have been forced to use aging aircraft and tanks dating back to the days of the Soviet Union.